One of the things that we will discover is 1787 was a very good year. The African Methodist Episcopal Church was born. 223 years later, I've learned that only a few things never lose their importance. One is voting. Our power is at the voting box. November the 3rd is Election Day. I urge the 12th Episcopal District, home of the Little Rock Nine, to join with the AME Church in the work of the AME V Alert by using the toolkit found at www.amev-alert.org. You will have a step-by-step guide to ensure that your vote counts. Let's get every voter to vote in 2020. I'm Bishop Michael Mitchell, presiding bishop of the 12th Episcopal District, comprising the state of Arkansas and Oklahoma, and also serving as the president of the Council of Bishops, and I approve of this message.
Good afternoon, and welcome to the latest edition of the TCR Dialogues. I am your host, Chuck Hobbs, and I have the pleasure this afternoon of interviewing my frat brother, Reverend Stephen Green, a young man who has done quite a bit of work over the course of his lifetime, but definitely this past year as the emphasis across the country has been on social justice. With that, welcome to the show, Reverend Green.
Thank you, Brother Hobbs. It's good to see you, Newt.
Yes, sir, Noop. Listen, when we start these dialogues, we always like to pay homage to our home church as well as our district. I am bringing greetings to you from the Bethel AME Church here in Tallahassee, Florida, the 11th district, which is led by Bishop A.J. Richardson, and my pastor is Reverend Julius McAllister. And so we would like for you to introduce yourself by doing the same. Can you give some greetings about where it is you hail from, and also your religious background and what the church means to you?
Sure. Well, good afternoon to those who are watching. My name is Reverend Stephen A. Green, and I serve in ministry at the Greater Allen Cathedral of New York, pastored by the Reverend Dr. Floyd and Elaine Flake in Jamaica, Queens, New York. Our bishop is Bishop Gregory Gerald McKinley Ingram, and our Episcopal supervisor, the Reverend Dr. Jessica Kendall Ingram, serves in ministry, and as I serve as a part of the New York Annual Conference. The AME Church, to me, is a church of connection. It is a church of liberation. It is what I have always known to be a family. I am a third generation member of the African Methodist Episcopal Church. My father serves in ministry in the AME Church. My grandfather served in ministry in the AME Church. And so I come from a steep tradition of a family that has served the AME Church and the kingdom broadly. And so to me, I believe it was the upbringing and the training as a young person developing in the AME Church that taught me that I was able to love the skin that I'm in and love and appreciate the culture that I represent. And I am a part of a long history, a long story of the fact that God has always been on the side of those who've been oppressed, those who've been downtrodden, and God believes that liberation is possible for all of his children. And so I am grateful to be a part of that lineage of the African Methodist Episcopal Church. I grew up playing AME Brain Bowl. So I at my presiding elders district Sunday school convention, the North Orlando District Church School Convention. And so I grew up understanding my faith and understanding that my faith was tied to the history and the liberation of my people. And for that, I'm grateful.
Absolutely. And Noop, as we continue to go forward, I would like to remind all of our viewers that if you could kindly leave your church, the state that you live in, and answer whether you have voted or not, as we are into the early voting season across America. So let's hop right in. You mentioned earlier Reverend Floyd Flake, and you talked about your Brain Bowl background as well. Those who are trivia nerds or just may have a good recollection of Black history over the last 50 years should know the name Floyd Flake very well. And we know that this past year there has been a street renaming. Can you talk to our viewers a little bit about that and what impact Reverend Flake, Congressman Flake had on your life?
Sure. I think as a child, I grew up knowing the Reverend Dr. Floyd Flake as a kind of a superhero. He was a congressman and a pastor, then became a college president, the trifecta of leadership. And so I believe that, and as I take this history, I want to just articulate how I know it to be true, is that Bishop John Richard Bryant, the retired senior bishop of the church, I believe birthed this Pentecostal fire, this Pentecostal spirit into the history of African Methodism. I think his ministry should be studied particularly. And as I study him as a scholar, I want to start there. I believe that the ministry of the AME Church's revival, rebirth, as far as a community empowered, spiritually motivated, liberating ministry begins, I believe, at St. Paul, Cambridge, Massachusetts, where the Reverend Dr. Floyd Flake, who was the dean at Boston University, joined that ministry there. And he and Reverend Elaine Flake were married out of that church, as well as a lot of young clergy who were birthed out of this movement from the St. Paul Church in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And so as Dr. Flake was assigned to pastor the Greater Allen Cathedral of New York, at that time the Allen AME Church, after the election of Bishop Donald G. K. Meany, it was Dr. Flake who began to imagine what the Pentecostal spirit of liberation looks like spiritually and I guess sort of sociologically. So it was spiritual liberation as well as economic liberation, political liberation, community development. And he looked around and began to, with his business mindset as someone who was a former executive, he begins to look at the church as an institution, not just of spiritual liberation, but of also economic empowerment, in ways that the Black church can begin to create an ecosystem of economic development. So from senior housing, which he began to develop to provide homes for seniors to live in our communities, all the way to health centers and to actual affordable housing units, where he built two family homes, so the families who purchased the home would be able to rent out the other side and pay the mortgage. And so there was an ecosystem of economic and spiritual development that cultivated and that was curated by the ministry of Pastor Flake, that I think inspired my father's ministry as the pastor of the St. Mark Church in Orlando. So I grew up with those as the models of my father's ministry. And so as I trace the lineage back, that's why I believe that my father was such influenced by Dr. Flake, and why I, as a second generation, have admired his ministry and look forward to ways that the entire AME Church has benefited from a ministry that is one of the most amazing worship and arts ministries, to ministry that has a wealth of talented resources, of community services, and of community development, but yet also one who has been transformative in the realm of politics and serving the U.S. government, much like the Reverend Dr. Frederick Douglass, who will give that nomenclature to today, has laid, and Nat Turner and Bishop Henry McNeil Turner particularly, this legacy of a faith leader who has been engaged in civics as well. So a civic leader who's a community leader who's also a spiritual leader.
Amen. And with that, Noop, let me ask you, with your own journey here to leadership, both as a minister as well as with respect to civil rights, you were instrumental in the development of the Faith for Black Lives organization. Can you discuss that organization with our viewers and why it was founded?
Sure. Faith for Black Lives is an organization, a consortium of leaders, of faith leaders who are working in tandem with the fight for Black liberation. which has been curated by the Movement for Black Lives. And so this Movement for Black Lives is a movement for Black liberation. It is a movement for Black empowerment, and as faith leaders who are working alongside with our brothers and sisters in this movement for Black liberation that has been curated by the Movement for Black Lives, I think it's important that we show our very selves in a very tangible and visible way. And so we convene clergy in communities across the country to train them in nonviolent direct action and community organizing, so that when we are organizing in communities, we have people who organize from a faith-based lens, people who organize from a lens of morality, a lens of moral leadership, as the Reverend Dr. Robert Michael Franklin Jr. would suggest, because we believe that moral leadership is the key to transformative leadership, and transformative leadership will help us live and basically walk into the beloved community that we so aspire and so hope to dwell in.
Absolutely. Now, over the past 2 weeks, Brother Green, we've all learned what was going to happen up in Louisville, Kentucky. All this year, since Breonna Taylor was killed on or about March 13th of this year, there has been a persistent push for justice here in her name. And unfortunately, that justice has been fleeting. Yes, we recognize that through the works of one of my friends, Ben Crump, a lawyer here based in Tallahassee, Florida, that there has been a $12 million civil settlement for the family. But more pertinently, while financial remuneration is always great for those who are grieving the loss of a loved one due to the negligence or reckless act of certain government actors, many people across this country still are frustrated with the process that officers could barge into someone's home looking for a person who was not there and wind up killing an innocent human being in the process. You were instrumental in the protests pushing for justice in her case. Can you talk to our viewers a little bit about what that entailed over the course of the last 6 or 7 months from your perspective?
Sure. I think it's to be said that the local leaders in Louisville have been demonstrating for about 145 days since the senseless murder of our dear sister Breonna Taylor. I believe that what we are witnessing in Louisville and what Louisville is witnessing to the nation and indeed the world is the conglomeration of the triple evils of society: poverty, militarism, and racism, all rearing their ugly head. As we witness the cover up of the botched raid that walked into a Black woman's home with a no-knock warrant, but yet they say they knocked. They say they acknowledged their presence, even though they had a no-knock warrant. They suggested that she had a shotgun, a long-arm shotgun. They did not find one. They suggested that she had drugs and money there. They did not find it. So we've realized that from this case, it continues to expose that the problem of policing is the true problem of white supremacist violence, which is inherently rooted in the very fabric of this nation. And so we're fighting a system and not just a case. This moment of time that Louisville is called this city to a reckoning moment is one that exposes that the people are sick and tired of being sick and tired, that they are frustrated with the inequities of poverty, the harsh brutality of militarized policing that continues to assault and to invoke violence against nonviolent demonstrators who adhere to their First Amendment rights in the streets. And so we're seeing a pervasive evil that it continues to to showcase its evil head in a city that has democratic leadership. So we recognize that it is beyond partisan politics. This is not about the donkey versus the elephant. This is at the very core of the very fabric of this nation. It is a very stain and sin of slavery and white supremacist violence and hegemony that continues to rear its ugly head. And what the AME Church has done in Louisville, Kentucky, the St. Mark AME Church, pastored by Pastor Sherry Wright, and other faith leaders in Louisville have been actively on the ground, providing support to demonstrators, opening their churches, providing resources, and availing them of themselves as a pastoral care responder. Because the reality is that what happens on the front line is really it is really indicative of the battle that we are talking about for the soul of this nation. That on the front lines in demonstrations, at the front lines of protests, it's a battle that has a spiritual warfare engaged in it. And so you are literally fighting against systematic evil that rears its ugly head in the very presence of white supremacist violence is the presence of a spiritual demon of white supremacy that we must cast out from the earth. And I think that's what, when we talk about his hand-to-hand combat, that I heard in a sermon from dear sister Prathia Hall, who talks about waging war in the spirit realm and hand-to-hand combat. That's what I think demonstrating and what the activists are doing on the front lines in Louisville, Kentucky, and New York City, and all over this entire nation, and really truly throughout the world, as those who are on the side of the oppressed intend to resist this empire, the tyranny, the fascist government, the white supremacist violence that continues to be evoked from the highest office in the land. And yet, and still, we believe that their pursuit of freedom is a spiritual journey, that liberation is a calling, it is a vocation, and it is a place that we will exist and live in the here and now, and not just in the great by and by.
Brother Green, with that, from your perspective, how can the AME Church assist you, other pastors, as well as activists towards making the whole Black Lives Matter slogan into meaningful legislation and reform here across the country?
Well, I would say that the AME Church's unique gift is that we are spread throughout the entire nation. Is that the AME Church is one of the greatest organized institutions in Black America, and even not just in Black America, in the diaspora. That the African Methodist Episcopal Church is the vehicle of spiritual and political liberation for the entire diaspora. And when we recognize that we walk under that weight, that we walk under the weight of a connectional institution that is able to connect people from Brazil to Brooklyn, then we can recognize that we have power to liberate ourselves economically, that we who are people of the African Methodist Episcopal Church can provide economic resources so that the faith movement, the faith-based movement for Black liberation, is not funded through corporate interests. It is not funded through white philanthropic dollars that will intend to hone and lower your voice, but that the African Methodist Episcopal Church should be a part of the liberatory tool of Black freedom economics. That Black freedom economics, Black revolutionary economics is inculcated into our system. And so that way we can provide a transfer of resources and a transfer of power. And also we recognize that we hold the political capital in many of our local cities and many of our local communities. And so if the African Methodist Episcopal Church would begin to affirm a Jubilee justice agenda of Black liberation, the AME Church needs a political agenda. Black America needs a political agenda, so that we are not voting based off of personalities, but we are voting and upholding people by virtue of policy. And that is what it's going to take to move Black people to the path forward, on a path to liberation, is that we must begin to hone ourselves, not on personalities. I don't care if you like me. I don't care if you want me to come to my church in every October. I want to know what policies will you enact and change, and what is your track record of transformative policies that will make Black liberation possible in this nation and beyond.
Indeed. And you have this afternoon already very powerfully stated the role that the Black church, and specifically our denomination, has played in the abolition movement, as well as anti-Jim Crow and the anti-lynching movements, as well as the traditional civil rights movement, so to speak. Has it surprised you, Brother Green, that it has taken almost 7 years for the Black Lives Matter movement to go from a slogan and considered somewhat on the fringe, even within the Democratic Party, so to speak, to now being front and center in the Democratic Party, and even something that is mentioned, albeit somewhat in a pejorative tone, from the Republican Party. Has that surprised you somewhat that it's taken so long for the slogan aspect of this, the desire to make law enforcement work for our people the same way that it works for white people or any other race in America, to be front and center now in our modern politics?
Yes, I think it is more vocal and prevalent now for this conversation to be on the forefront of the minds of this American democracy, solely because I believe that what it suggests to us is that our anger and our pain is being redistributed. I believe that it was Dr. King who said, now has come the time for us to redistribute our pain. And I believe because we have failed to go back into our silos, because for the last 4 years, we have not taken our foot off of the necks of this democracy, that we have consistently, from the Women's March in 2017 to our March for Our Lives in 2018 to the movement to resist the Justice Kavanaugh and the Me Too movement in 2018 and 2019 to now this Black resistance movement that is rearing itself again after the death and murder of George Floyd. It is that we as people of liberation have not kept our foot off of white supremacy as well. And we must keep our foot on the necks of white supremacy. And we must continue to fight for the liberation of our people. And I think that is why this moment is so indicative of what is to come, and that we are prepared for true transformation in a global perspective, is because people are sick and tired of being sick and tired. And that we have consistently told and upheld that this is beyond skin color, that this moment of liberation is beyond whether or not we are driving in our cars in Houston, Texas, like Sandra Bland. It goes beyond whether we are walking in our neighborhoods with Skittles and iced tea. It goes beyond if we are a 12-year-old child like Tamir Rice. It goes beyond if we are running or jogging in our neighborhood like Ahmaud Arbery. It goes beyond us sleeping in our home like as if we are Breonna Taylor. This is a problem that is indicative of the very core of the American problem, the American Republic, and that is truly is stain and sin of white supremacy. This is beyond our blackness, because what we have seen them do to our brothers and sisters at the border, providing hysterectomies to sisters of color, separating and dividing families and putting them in cages, that all of the oppressive tactics and all of the oppressive forces of power that this regime and tyranny has invoked upon our people is indicative of the very fact that this nation at its core was birthed out of this expression. So you cannot tether what we see now and what we're saying now is that this Black Lives Matter is not tethered to the fact that it was Obama in the White House, but it is reflective of the very fact that it does not matter who is in the White House. It does not matter who occupies the Senate. It does not matter who occupies the House of Representatives. We know very truly at its core that America in and of itself is a problem, and it always stands against liberation of those people who are oppressed.
Noop, I'm in 100% agreement with you. I think that one of the things that I have noticed over time is that when you look back, even I'd say 100 years ago, this year has marked the 100th anniversary of women's suffrage. And when you look at some of the signs that were being carried, both during the women's suffrage movement, as well as just back then when, next year marks 100th anniversary of the Tulsa massacre, in 2023 will mark the anniversary of the Rosewood massacre here in Florida. When you look at the signs that protesters were carrying in the 19-teens and the 1920s, protesters doing the same with lynching in the 1930s and the 1940s, on through to the civil rights movement in the 1950s and 60s, the common theme, as you've addressed this afternoon, white supremacy and racism, the dates change, but the problems remain the same. There are ties that bind. Sometimes when I stop and think about the fact that my grandparents and my great-grandparents were probably hoisting or looking at the same signs that we are to this day, it's disheartening. And I too appreciate the fact that unlike back 100 years ago or even 50 years ago when it was a predominantly Black movement, it does seem as if there are more of our white brothers and sisters, Latino brothers and sisters, and Asians that also are sick and tired as well. And that has to be encouraging. But I do want to follow up on something that you asked. When you were talking about how it seems as if in 2020, Black Lives Matter as a movement specifically has taken center stage here in our national political discussion. Recognizing that we have barely a month left before the presidential election, I know that Democratic nominee Joe Biden has put forth his Lift Every Voice plan, and Republican incumbent Donald Trump has his Platinum plan for Black America. Do you mind talking a little bit about how Blacks in this movement specifically need to be prepared to work with either or? Understanding that many within our denomination are actively supporting Joe Biden, there is always the possibility in any election that Donald Trump could win again. Can you talk to our viewers a little bit about that in terms of those two plans and how it is that we continue to push our specific agenda within either administration, depending upon who is the victor?
Sure. I believe that the plans of both candidates, that it took, only President Trump about 4 years and about a few more months to get a plan for Black Americas. It was Joe Biden who unveiled his plan just shortly sooner, I think, of the plan Lift Every Voice. I have had a chance to look at and peruse both of these plans, and I find both of the plans to be short of what we all actually need to be liberated. But I do find that there is a direct investment in the Lift Every Voice plan and trying to carve the layers of the onion that are consistently the problems and the source of our problems of Black liberation. I think that is what I guess the challenge has been in hoping that we can completely get to ultimate liberation. But I think it's important to note that while the Lift Every Voice plan talks about a commission to study reparations, it talks about ending mandatory minimums, it talks about trying to provide mental health resources, it talks about eliminating student loan debt for people who make under $125,000, it talks about eliminating HBCU debt for those who make under $125,000, that I would rather fight someone who actually will hire someone who cares than to fight against someone who consistently shows us that he does not care. And the Platinum plan only shows us that Donald Trump does not care about Black liberation. Donald Trump cares about consistently trying to put money into the hands of Black capitalists, but not into the hands of those who are the most oppressed of society. And so I believe that if Black people intend to make any set of progress, if we as a people would like to begin to move towards a path of liberation, then it's clear that there's one plan that outweighs the other, and that is the Lift Every Voice plan. Is it the ultimate plan? Is it the Lift Every Voice and Sing plan? No, we are not going to be singing with this plan. We might be raising our voices, and we will consistently have to raise our voice, and we will have to go march on Washington again with the Biden-Harris administration. We will have to be in the streets again in a Biden-Harris administration. But I tell you this, we know that if we're in the streets, we will not have the same level of hostility that will come from 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. We will not have the Attorney General who will intend to harm peaceful, nonviolent demonstrators through terrorist, fascist tactics of watchdogging and wiretapping and doing all they can to infringe upon our First Amendment rights of freedom and protest. So I think that we must recognize that we, in the next 28 days, must do all that we can to talk to Black men. I want to just be specific about this conversation right now because we're 28 days away, and I think it's important to note that Black men will be the deciding factor in this election. That what Black men decide to do, whether we decide to go to the polls or whether we decide to stay home, we will be the leaven in the bread who will help determine the future and the trajectory of this nation. And so, Black men, now is a time where we must stand up for our communities. You must talk to everybody in the barbershop, talk to your sons, talk to your nephews, talk to Black men everywhere, and encourage Black men, particularly young Black men between the ages of 18 and 25, is a target demographic that we need to talk to about beginning to roll back the layers of the onion that have caused all of us to cry for 401 years.
Indeed. And with regards to your last series of statements, in addition to being AME brothers, we are both Morehouse men and members of Kappa Alpha Psi Fraternity Incorporated. Two-part question here. Can you discuss what Morehouse College meant to you and what Kappa Alpha Psi has meant in regards to training you for the specific leadership that you are showing across the country right now? That's the first question. And then secondly, I'll come back to the second one after you answer the first, because the second one harkens back to what you just said about engaging brothers across the country to vote on November the 3rd.
Sure. Morehouse College cultivated what the AME Church deposited into me. It was the AME Church that birthed the seed of Black liberation, but it was Morehouse that cultivated it and gave me the language to speak and to communicate and to become a man and to begin to develop the passion of responsibility and moral social responsibility to community and to God's people. And so I believe that is what has helped shape me as a Black man, has helped shape me. That I was at Morehouse College under the presidency of Dr. Robert Michael Franklin Jr., who was a minister, theologian, and one who I heard speak at an AME Bishops' Council. He was the banquet speaker in Birmingham, Alabama in 2010, when Bishop James Davis became the president of the Council of Bishops. I'll never forget hearing his speech and hearing that resounding thunder in his voice that made me affirm my decision that I needed to be at Morehouse College. I think it's important for me that it was there that I was able to walk in the spirit of activism and the calling of activism that's been on my life. It was there that I learned how to organize for Troy Davis and Trayvon Martin and Kendrick Johnson. And I believe that at Morehouse College was where, we were torn in between the reality of a Black man in the White House who would speak out of graduation, and yet I came from a neighborhood not too far away from Trayvon Martin and where that took place in Sanford, Florida. So we were nestled in between the two, that if you tell us that we go to college and try to do right, then we could end up like Barack Obama. But if you come from neighborhoods and live in communities where we had just all one step away from being like Trayvon Martin, and yet and still you were inflicted upon the stain and sin of white supremacy. So, and then to hear President Obama affirm that dichotomy and that wrestling of the two-ness, of the twainness, to be Black and to be a man in America, was yet to be Black and to be an American, and by and large, or to be Black and to be human, to be more performative, pejorative, I would suggest. But nonetheless, it was at Morehouse hearing that transformation and beginning that transformative pathway to liberation that I believe helped cultivate me to be the pastor that I am, to be the faith leader that I am, and to help become all that God has called me to be in this movement.
Absolutely. And with that, you raise a point that I speak about often, is that dichotomy, that two-ness that you speak of. There are so many of our white brothers and sisters who tend to almost dismissively suggest, until you correct them, that because you are a pastor and you are a college graduate, and because I have practiced law and been a journalist for well over 2 decades, that the trappings of success, be it financial or whatever, inure some types of benefit that we should not be complaining. We should not be pushing. You see it sometimes also thrown out when people get upset that athletes, the LeBron Jameses of the world, when they speak out about social injustices and, with the whole shut up and play ball thing. And at the end of the day, as I often note, those ball players, you as a pastor, and even with me living here in Tallahassee and having some level of notoriety in my hometown, I still am an improper lane change and a cop with a grudge from being the next hashtag. And I think we even saw that this past weekend. Jonathan Price, I don't know if you've been able to follow much about that out in Texas. Young man who went to college, athlete, seems to have been doing everything right, wrote a lengthy post back in June, as a matter of fact, about how much he supports the blue. And he was he was somewhat antagonistic toward the Black Lives Matter movement, if not the slogan, in his Facebook post. And now here it is 3 months later, he is a hashtag, and the Black Lives Matter movement is doing what we can to actually bring justice for him after he was being a good Samaritan, broke up a domestic altercation. And when the officers arrived there, because he was a large Black male trying to explain, hands up, telling them what was going on, as he was walking away, he got shot in the back, just like the young man did up in Kenosha, Wisconsin earlier this summer. So again, it's a pervasive problem, and I commend you for what it is that you're doing to bring light and hopefully inspire change. With that in mind, also, one of the things that has bothered me, Noop, over the course of the last 6 to 8 weeks since Kamala Harris was tapped to be the vice presidential nominee for Joe Biden, is some of the rank sexism and misogyny that I see across social media, in the comment sections of traditional media articles. There are a lot of people, including a whole lot of brothers, who are way too comfortable with calling her out of her name, referring to her by derogatory terms. With that in mind, with only 28 days left, what is it that we as Black men can be doing specifically to push back against those putrid narratives that are coming by some wayward brothers who seem to just not get it? They talk about Kamala Harris in ways that I dare say they would not speak about their mothers, their wives, girlfriends, and definitely not their daughters. What do you think about that?
Well, I think that we have a lot of work to do to begin to disassociate Black men from the trauma of a criminal justice system that has consistently been a violent threat towards the existence of Black and brown men in this country, and particularly Black men, that from the cradle to the grave, that we are constantly fighting against a system of criminal justice and mass incarceration. That when you are a child and they send you to timeout in school, or they put you in a corner, they begin to frame our minds of what isolation looks like when you have committed something that is not right in society. And from that time on, where young Black boys are most often detentioned, sentenced to suspensions, and are targeted in schools because they are, quote unquote, acting out, that we are beginning to shape a consciousness and a psyche of incarceration in the mindset of our children. And as they grow up to become men, they are constantly threatened by the idea that you are always caught against or nestled in between a rock and a hard place from a system that targets Black men. And so I think when people are talking negatively about Senator Kamala Harris, that they are most connected to the legacy of criminal justice, of mass incarceration, which is based off her history as an attorney general in California. So I think that we have to acknowledge the fact that Black men are not wayward because they're frustrated that Kamala Harris was a cop. That is a fair allegation for Black men to be cautious, because they are threatened by a system that has consistently tried to harm them and to dehumanize them from the inception of their livelihood as a child. However, this is not the time for us as Black men to recognize that we are not a part of a larger narrative, that this is a part of a coexistence, that we as a people, as Black men, are a part of society, when we have always done our job trying to be by being excluded from society. Society has done its job to exclude us from society. So in order to talk to Black men about the importance of this election, you have to talk to Black men about their importance to Black people. That Black men have to become important to America again so that we can talk to them about the importance of them being a part of our family and being, as Black men, being a part of the human family, as being a part of recognizing that what is harmful to the human family is 4 more years of Donald J. Trump in the White House. And so I believe that must begin to become some of our narrative around reimagining for Black men how we view politics, how we view society's ethics, because societal ethics don't give way to us to believe that voting is going to help us move our way to liberation at any political representation, because we have been so disillusioned by the political infrastructure of this current society that it infringes our even vision. It blocks our seeing forward what is yet possible. And so I believe that that needs to be the conversation that we are having in barbershops. That needs to be the conversation that Black men are having amongst themselves on street corners. That must be the conversation that fraternities are having. That must be the conversation, that we have around the dinner table with our brothers, because we have not done the job. We have not done a good job of trying to affirm that this must be the presidential administration that would end the school to prison pipeline. I have yet to see that in anybody's platform playing. I've yet to hear any politician talk about not just mass incarceration and ending mandatory minimums, in the school to prison pipeline, because it is true that you target us when we're in 3rd grade and know, but based off our reading levels is how you're going to build your beds. We know that is what happens. We know that they profit off of our young people. We know that they profit off of our children, track recording them through systems where they take medicine and targeting them with mental illness and infringing upon them their God-given rights, because we believe in a society that continues to try to hone in on our humanity. So now we must begin to broaden our expressions. We must broaden our view of liberation. We must broaden our perspective of beloved community if we are to bring Black men into the fold, because our vision must be for an appointed time. Our vision must be for a time that is not just now. We cannot just make things go back to what they were under President Obama or even President Clinton. The time now is to imagine something broader. And I believe that with a Donald Trump administration, we are further along than we have ever been. And this will dismantle the next 30 years of the progress that we could make if we do not do something quick.
Amen, Noob. And you raise a bunch of great issues, particularly when you were speaking about the fact that when discussing Senator Harris's record when she was Attorney General, as well as District Attorney in San Francisco, are subject for being vetted. I have no disagreement with you on that, but I would just like to follow up. Would you agree with me also that in the barbershop, as well as in the pulpit, that we as Black men have to do a better job of protecting Black women? And what I mean by that is, one of the things that has disturbed me most is that some of the rhetoric coming from some Black men has been just as putrid as the rhetoric coming from white men about her. I call it the Hester printing, so to speak, of Kamala Harris, speaking about who she may have been involved with in a relationship, things of that nature that are completely out of bounds from my perspective with regards to whether or not she's fit for a job. But we see it over and over and over again. And I know that I'm doing my part on social media and traditional media to check any Negro who gets on and has something negative to say or calling Kamala Harris out of her name. Do you think that that's something that we all must do, both journalists, lawyers, pastors, push back against sexism and misogyny as well?
Absolutely. We must do it with all deliberate speed. We must do it quickly. We must do it from the pulpit. We must do it from the Twitter and from the Facebook and Instagram, that we must begin to affirm and to love Black women in public. And I think that's what's important. And even in the church, We must begin to dismantle the system of patriarchy that is prevalent in the African Methodist Episcopal Church. We must dismantle it. We must dismantle the system of patriarchy that is prevalent in Black homes. But we recognize that patriarchy is a form of white supremacist violence. It is a form of white supremacy. And so to embrace patriarchy is to embrace the same supremacy or the same sin of white supremacy. And so we must do the work of dismantling all of these isms of this hierarchy, this westernized notion that one is superior than the other. This is not who we are innately as African people, that as African people, we are communal people. We believe in the ultimate hegemony of society, that we are at one, this oneness with society. We are at one with the spirit. We are at one with the earth. And I believe that when we allow whiteness, when we allow the idea of white supremacist hegemony to invoke our consciousness, then we believe as Black men that we are superior over our own brother, over our own sisters, over our own people who are not like us, over our trans brothers and sisters, over our non-cisgender brothers and sisters, over our LGBTQIA brothers and sisters. And so we must dismantle the level of this lineage of patriarchy and white supremacy that has allowed itself to be embedded in our hearts and souls, because that is not authentically at our core of who we are.
Amen, Noop. And with that, I want to segue into what one of the last two questions that I have for you this afternoon, and what has been a great discussion among brothers, triple brothers, as a matter of fact. One of the popular slogans this year, hailing from Black Lives Matter adherents, has been defund the police. Now, that means different things to different people. I have always taken it to mean reform the police. I have been corrected sometimes by young activists that no, defund the police means exactly what it says, Chuck Hobbs, defund the police. I'd like your perspective on defund the police. What does it mean to you? And then how would you like to see law enforcement reformed in America with how it treats people of color, specifically Black people?
I believe it was James Baldwin who talked about integrating into a burning house. And I believe the same thing about this defunding the police movement is that you have to abolish the police, that you cannot allow a system of white supremacist violence to police and to patrol communities, because that is antithesis of what justice and love looks like. So when we talk about defunding the police, we're talking about imagining public safety differently, right? Is that in some neighborhoods, how they have public safety is by having parks, grocery stores, adequate housing, clean water, right? And they have resources and quality schools and hospitals around. And that's how they have public safety. And I think that's what this movement is talking about. When we talk about defunding police, it's essentially that, taking the resources that we use to invest in police, citing us for traffic tickets and pulling up with guns and with rubber bullets and with all kinds of militarized equipment for tickets, for parking tickets, that we can redistribute that labor. We don't have to ticket someone for parking on the side of the street every day, or you can mail it in. However it is, you can reimagine how we want to use our resources to better our communities and to better our goods. Is that policing was designed in its inception to be slave patrols, and so it has kept in its ideology that its intention is to find criminality and to begin to invoke its privilege and its power, to begin to chart people through a system that mirrors chattel slavery, that ultimately ends up in the profiteering of Black bodies in a system of capitalism. And so we must recognize that police intend to protect what? People and property. And inherently what they are doing is insistently trying to protect a system of racialized capitalism. And so when we talk about defunding police, we're talking about defunding racialized capitalism. We're talking about defunding militarism. We're talking about defunding poverty, right? Because to invest in police is to also invest in poverty. So you have people to police. It is to invest in failing in education system. So you have people to police. It is to invest in not having mental health resources. So you have people to police who have substance abuse problems. It is to invest in other ways to harm people and to not provide them with resources they need so they can live a fair and just life. We must reimagine what the moral good, what the beloved community, what the ultimate good looks like for society. And that is what we should invest in. That is where our resources, I believe Jesus said, for where your treasure is where your heart lies. Where your heart lies is where your treasure is. Where you apply your resources, where a city's budget is, shows them that our priorities, America's priorities, are shown clearly in the 184 military installations we have across the world. Our budget priorities show us that we spend more money in military, and we spend more money in policing. We spend more money in trying to create this American idea of domination than we spend in peace, than we spend in love, than we spend in justice, than we spend in healthcare, than we spend in ending poverty, than we spend in ending militarism, than we spend in ending racialized injustices in this country. And so we must reimagine our resources. Go get the city's budget and see where your city's budget applies its resources. You can do that in every local community. You can look it up online and decide to tell your own local municipality it's time to redistribute the resources to the people and to the places that need it the most. Show us where your heart lies.
Amen. And Newt, the last question for the evening or the afternoon is, can you reflect a little bit on your work with Freedom Summer? Can you describe what that has entailed for our viewers?
Well, Freedom Summer is a way to channel the legacy of our ancestors who recognize the importance of the vote as a tool towards the pathway to liberation. And so Freedom Summer began to train communities that the vote is a tool. It is a part of our arsenal, that it is not voting that ended slavery, but it is the right to vote that we achieved by eradicating slavery. That in 1865, when we finally were awarded, black men were awarded the right to vote with the 13th Amendment, that ended slavery and restored the right to vote, the 14th and 15th Amendments. And I think that 13, 14, 15 Amendments, and what we're talking about now is how we can, as a community, use this as a tool. For far too long, we have told people that black people, that the vote and the ballot is the liberation, and it is not. It is the tool for liberation, and that it is. That with the vote, you are able to have resources and power. Without the vote, we have no voice. That with the vote, we're able to communicate and affirm and to continue to resist and show our power and show the places where our heart and our treasures do lie. But without the vote, we're lost without a voice in a symphony and a choir. And so we must recognize that Freedom Summer began to articulate that vision to faith leaders, because we cannot just tell people that your ancestors died for you to vote and that's why you got to vote. We must begin to tell people that your ancestors died so that you would be free. And because you are free, you ought to have the power to vote. You have the power to be free. You have the power to healthcare. You have the power to education. You have the power to a guaranteed annual income. All of those things are resources and conduits of your freedom. And voting is not the impetus towards your freedom. Voting allows us to keep ourselves resourced on the pathway towards liberation. And that's what Freedom Summer and now Freedom Fall begins to help us conscientize ourselves, because we must know that on November 3rd, it is not the end all be all. That is not the day that trouble won't last always. That is the day that we must recognize the very power of our vote. That is the day that we must begin to show up in the streets. That's why we're calling for on November the 4th, no matter what the election or the results are, on November the 4th, we're the president. we are deciding to affirm and to hold this nation up to the standards of love, justice, and equality that she so longly and so bewilderingly wants to be. We intend to hold this nation to be her best self and to make her be true to the words that was written on paper.
With that, you get the final word. Thanks so much. Like they say, you can always tell a Morehouse man, but you can't tell them much. But I've enjoyed our dialogue this afternoon, Noop, and I wish you blessings and Godspeed in your work. And I look forward to speaking with you again in this format in the future. Thank you so much for coming on.
Have a good one. Very
good. You too. Now, for those who have viewed, the next TCR dialogue will be on October the 14th with Congressman Gregory Meeks of New York. And you can also support the Christian Recorder by buying a subscription, $36 a year. Visit www.thechristianrecorder.com. And you can support the AME Church Publishing House for your church, school, and worship needs. Featured product is the Empowerment Syllabus. Visit www.amecpublishing.com. We also would like to thank our sponsors for today, Reverend Dr. James F. Miller, the 2021 candidate for Executive Director of Retirement Services.
Hi, everybody. God bless you today. Many years ago, the Retirement Services Department was known as minimum salary, and it was combined with the Stewardship Department. I went to a conference sponsored by them many years ago now, 30 years ago. I hate to date myself. But I received at that conference all the instruction, the materials, and encouragement I needed to go home not only and become a tither, praise God, but to lead my church, DuPage AME Church in the Chicago Conference, to become a tithing church. I'm so thankful. After these many years, over 1 million pounds of food given to the poor, over $500,000 in scholarships to graduating high school seniors. Praise God, all of the many blessings. And so God called me to revive the stewardship component of the Retirement Services Department, in addition to overseeing the pension. I pray, hallelujah, that you'll be with us on a book discussion that we're having on Monday, October 12th at 7 p.m. Because the AME Church planted a seed. The ministry over these years has watered the seed, and God has given the increase. Join the discussion, and let's bless the kingdom. It's a path to abundance for the local church.
And again, we'd like to thank everybody for taking time this afternoon to listen to the latest episode of the TCR Dialogues. As always, I'm your host, Chuck Hobbs. And again, I would be remiss if I did not mention that our next guest on October the 14th, Congressman Gregory Meeks, is also a member of the Allen Cathedral AME Church. So we're definitely looking forward to speaking with our brother in Christ. And again, have a great afternoon, and we look forward to seeing you on the next episode.
Hello, I'm Cheryl Untitled, President and Director Counsel of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. Many of you know that a priority of the Legal Defense Fund is protecting the voting rights of African Americans. We're in the courts every day trying to ensure that every eligible African American has the ability to participate fully in the political process. But this year we face the additional challenge of COVID-19, and we need your help. Churches are an integral part of our community, and this year you can help by ensuring that every voter who needs it has available a mask and gloves on Election Day. We're asking you to begin to prepare now, ordering extra PPE so that voters in your community will know that your church will be out at the polls on Election Day with free masks and gloves to every voter who needs it. This is something our churches should be able to do. We're asking you to help. Please reach out and contact me if you have any questions, but I'm hoping that you will connect with those in your community who can help you with this important initiative for our community and for our democracy. Thank you.
Have a good afternoon, everybody.